This tutorial is how to facilitate session 2 of the Parent Wellness Circle program. And this is on page 16 and 17 in the participant workbook, which we're looking at here. This is the lesson. It's entitled, What School of Parenting Did You Attend? I'll come back to the lesson in just a moment after we go over the opening, our suggestions for how to open session 2. On page 49 of the facilitator guide, we see the session 2 title, What School of Parenting Did You Attend? And we will see that we cover, as we do with each session, the purpose of this session and the objectives. By the end of session 2, group members will be able to do the following. So take a look at that in your facilitator guide. And then on page 50, we see the opening here. Again, based on a 90-minute session, these time blocks over here are always approximate, and they are based on a 90-minute session. And so shorten it if you need to do it maybe a 75-minute. We don't recommend much shorter than that unless you really maybe just have 2 or 3 parents. You could do it in 60 minutes. So want to do a welcome and centering time. Again, you've heard us say this before. We'll continue to say it. Continue to make this your own. However you want to open, whatever is natural for you. Maybe there was something that emerged in the first session that you want to something you want to pull back into an opening. We will always have suggestions here for you. You are free to follow those as they are written, or you are free to make up your own. So the one that we have here is just after you kind of check in, then invite them to share one thing that they are grateful for from the last week, either for themselves and or their family. What's one thing that they are grateful for? And you can even have them, if you want to do journaling time, you could ask that question and then ask them to journal it in some of the blank pages in their book, in their workbook, and then share them, or however you want to do that. But that's always you never go wrong with starting a wellness circle by saying let's focus on what we're grateful for and help them to pay attention to that. So that's one idea for the opening. Then the teaching segment we recommend here. Roughly, again, minutes 15 to 35. Again, you're not going to be teaching that the whole time. The idea is to make the presentation of the key concepts, and then it's the conversation that it gives rise to. That's the time variable. And sometimes the teaching segment, this is the art of facilitating. The conversation is just really rich and it's going forward, and so you let it go longer. So you may go much longer than it is listed here. Then you're going to have less time for the coaching component. So again, the structure of the session, I like to think of it as like a bell-shaped curve. The opening is the beginning of the bell-shaped curve. Then the next big section up like to the middle of the bell-shaped curve is the teaching segment. Then starting in the second half, the third section, the second big section is the coaching, and then you have a closing. So it's all adjustable. But this whole focus of this lesson is what school of parenting did you attend? And you'll see some of the notes here and our ideas for how to present this. Obviously, they will be looking at their workbooks, and I'm going to switch back to the workbook here in just a second. As you're teaching this lesson to them. So here we are back in the workbook now, and this title, What School of Parenting Did You Attend? Is just our kind of strength-based or a non-judgmental based way of just helping parents to look at their own childhood and to look at the background. There's that saying that parenting doesn't come with an instruction manual, right? It doesn't, but we all got instruction. We've all attended a school of parenting, and that was the school, that was the adults that raised us in the homes in which we grew up. We could not have helped but internalize what was taught in that curriculum. And so it's just a way of giving, it's a language to help them understand and begin to look at their own childhood. And while for some of this may be obvious that how we were parented has a great deal of effect on how we parent, that is not obvious for everyone. I can tell you that I've facilitated many parent wellness circles where this is an aha moment for parents, that they are connecting the dots, that they realize that they are continuing a pattern that they're not happy with, but it's exactly the pattern that they experienced as a child. And for some, it's hard for them to acknowledge and say, I promised, I vowed that I would never do what my mother did or my father did, or I would do it differently, and here I am doing some of the same things. So again, no judgment, no shame. It's just to help them to understand how inevitable that is. If we grew up in England, for example, and learned to drive in England, we would know how to drive on the left side of the road. That's what would be totally second nature to us, familiar to us. We wouldn't even have to think about it. Could we move to the United States and learn a whole different way of driving, to drive on the right side of the road, or vice versa? If we grew up in the U.S., could we move to England and learn a whole new way? Of course we could, but it would take some real effort and intention and desire. Otherwise, we fall into our default patterns. Now we want to look at this pattern of, again, painting in broad strokes, that some schools of parenting were more love-based and some were more fear-based. So in their book, we have this diagram. It's a teeter-totter. Again, just to try to make it a little more easier to discuss, it kind of gives them this metaphor that schools of parenting, the homes we grew up in, tended to kind of come down on one side of this teeter-totter or the other, either fear or love-based. Say more about what those mean in a moment. Although some homes went back and forth. And it may have been, maybe if a parent was sick, or a parent was unemployed, or a parent was deployed in the military, maybe things then became more fear-based. There was a lot of anxiety and chaos in the home then. Otherwise, it was more love-based. Or if there was substance abuse in the home, when the adults were sober and clean, it was more love-based. When they were using, it was more fear-based. So it's the words are listed here, fear-based. You know if you're living in a fear-based home because you experience these things, and this is kind of the mindset. It's you can also expand this too, not just to think about a home. Again, to give them examples, they can think of maybe in jobs they've had. What kind of boss? Was the boss and the leadership more fear-based, or was it more love-based? They can think of coaches. They can think of other examples. So in fear-based, you follow as a child. You obey out of fear, out of fear of punishment, out of fear of discipline, in that sense of a punishment or a very harsh consequence. And you don't necessarily respect, but you fear. In love-based, there's a very strong relationship, and it's characterized by these attributes here, which are certainly much more positive. I like to ask parents, think of a favorite teacher you had, a favorite mentor, a favorite coach, a favorite whatever, scout leader, whatever, someone that you remember well and you really wanted to do well for. I would almost always guarantee that that's a love-based approach to leading, to parenting. And when you have that strong bond and the strong relationship, you want to do well. So obviously, as we're talking about this and inviting them in this conversation about their past and about the school of parenting that they attended, the light bulbs are going off, and they're of course thinking about now the school of parenting that they're in charge of, their own home, and how are they doing in terms of this teeter-totter. Again, just like with the wellness inventory, no judgment. We are where we are. But if we can't be honest about where we are, we certainly can't change it. So this, as you can see, can imagine, can really give some really lively discussion. So let the discussion go as long as you want. Remember the bell-shaped curve, because you do need to make time now for the first coaching segment in session 2, and that will be coming up next year in the tutorial. So what I refer to as the coaching segment of session 2 in the facilitator guide, just to be clear, it's called sharing. This is where now it's time to share your next steps. Remember this line in every session, breakout session for larger groups. That's only if you have more than 6 to 8 or 10 parents. If you had a much larger group, let's say 20, you could do the first half basically of each session, the teaching, the opening, and then the teaching segment and discussion. And then if you have a co-facilitator, break into smaller groups for the coaching and the sharing of next steps. So this is when they really have a first chance to share their maps that they filled out, and hopefully they've had a chance to work on some next steps. If not, then they will certainly be sharing their maps and then setting their next steps for the upcoming week. Let's now turn and look at the actual page that you'll be coaching from and working with them, the page that's in their participant workbook. So you're in session 2, but you're actually going back to look here at the mapping the next steps of our journey that they filled out. either in session 1, maybe you had a chance to begin, or as it says here, to be completed between sessions 1 and 2. So what you want to do now, and again, the coaching part of this is it's this unique process of both individual coaching. It is individual coaching, but it's in a group context. So you're coaching one person at a time, and everyone else is listening. There is the rule about no crosstalk. There should not really be much interaction at this point. Even questions can be a little disruptive. It's more active listening is what you want from the other members, especially if you have a larger group, because time is going to be of the essence. And I like to look at the clock when I start this section of the session and say, okay, we have 30 minutes, we have 35 minutes for sharing our maps and our next steps. And let's count, let's do the math. There's 7 people here, and so that will give us 5 minutes a person. And so I might even put my timer out here on my phone, or I might ask somebody to be a timer to let us know, every 5 minutes. Time management is important. So you turn to person 1 and say who, or ask for volunteer, and the first person shares their map. And they share them with the group, their areas of high satisfaction, their areas of lower satisfaction, and then the area of the compass, the area of the whole person of wellness that they want to pay attention to, and perhaps may have already started to pay attention to since session 1. Okay? So that's really important to get that area named, and then have a sense of where they are at this point in that area, and then where they wish to be. So it's kind of like on a map. If you're walking around in a strange city, you're visiting, you would find a map. Oh, you are here. Okay, well, I wish I was here. This is where I want to get. So now I need to create my map of how I'm going to get from where I am to where I wish to be. And then we invite people to come up with an inspiring quote. Some people will really get into that. Some groups really get into that. Some people even write them down and laminate them and share them with each other. Some kind of quote that will inspire them. It can be from any source that will just kind of keep them focused. It's just another way, a reminder. It's another prompt. They can put it up on their computer screen. They can put it on their refrigerator. Centering practice. This is more like a mindfulness or centering practice. Something that just helps them to slow down, take some breaths, and pause, and then be more intentional. Because so much of life, especially for parents, is we get caught up in cycles of reactivity, and we get distracted, and we are not living intentionally and mindfully. We're not living from the inside out, from a center place. So any kind of journaling, you're kind of opening the sessions in a way that provides some centering time, some calming down, some pausing time. Will they need support from others, previous successes, the challenges they're going to face? And then the goal and the next steps. The goal is something larger. So the goal may be, I want to minimize, I want to change the amount of screen time in our family, or I want to change the way we do meals, or the way we do breakfast morning routines, or the way we do evening routines, or I want to change my work-life balance. The goals tend to be a longer-term goal that may or not be achievable within the 6 weeks of a parent wellness circle, but certainly then we can begin taking the next steps towards that goal. So the next steps are breaking it down to something specific that they can do this week, something that they feel a sense of that is needed. They feel it's their need, that is a felt need that they have. They have some sense of excitement, some positive energy about this. Not something they should do, and it's time specific. They can do it this week. So if they did this earlier in the week, then they can tell you how that next step went. And if they didn't, then they're setting their next step for the upcoming week. And if they, I'll just stop there. So you go around and do that with each person, ask them to check in and complete or to share their map here. And then you'll see, so now I'm back in the session 2 here on pages 16 and 17. This is the teaching segment we already did. But then you'll see there's a shorter version, and this will appear in sessions 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's a shorter version of mapping your next steps for the upcoming week. Now, for some people, it may be exactly what they just did because they really hadn't done anything. But some people have already done something, and so now they're ready to. It says to be completed between sessions 2 and 3. This is to continue. So if they did start something, so if they were working on screen time and they had an initial conversation with one of their kids and it didn't go well, so now they're going through this week and they're going to maybe refine their wisdom quote, their inspiring quote, their mindfulness centering practice, and then maybe their next step is to be, okay, I'm gonna hold a family meeting. I'm going to get everybody in the house involved, and I'm just, I'm not going to come on too strong. I'm not going to tell them, I'm not going to lay down the law. I'm not going to lay down rules. I'm just going to simply ask people. I'm going to start a conversation about the use of screen time, including my own, and ask us to start paying attention to it and have conversations about it, whether we think it's good for us and what changes could we possibly make, whatever. So the next step, usually each week, they're usually building on their next step from the previous week. They can sometimes change areas. That is, as it says in the top of this form, area of wellness you wish to continue to focus on, or a new area, because sometimes the area. So let's say it's the morning routine, and the parent in the group is having a really stressful time, getting up and getting out the door, getting the kids out the door, and getting to work on time. And so their first attempt is to talk to the kids and try to change the morning routine. But what they may realize is that they actually need to talk to their boss or talk to someone at the workplace and see if they can get a little flex time and start a little bit later in the morning. That may be so we sometimes move around the compass. Many times the parent will realize that their lack of sleep or their lack of self-care is the root of whatever the issue that they started out working on. So they can choose a different area. So this is them, they set their next step, they work on it for the next week, and now they start to get the rhythm. This is what they're going to do. They're going to check in, they're going to look back and check in, and then they're going to set their next steps for the upcoming week. And it really gets to be fun. The coaching part is actually fun. People say, this is better than reality television. I get to come back next week and find out, did Sue talk to her boss? How did that conversation go with the kids about curfew, about homework, about screen time, whatever it was? How did it go? I can't wait to hear. And so that's the coaching part. So now you're kind of down near remember that bell-shaped curve I put up earlier? Now you're nearing the end of the bell-shaped curve. You're nearing the end of the session. And then you can decide how you want to close it. You can do that however you want to do. So the close is always optional. And here there's a 15 minutes here for journaling and closing. That may be a lot, and it's really hard to predict how the close is going to go, but just because you want to be open to the energy. If there's a lot of conversation that's really good around the teaching segment, you may go a little bit longer with that. If there's really good energy around the coaching, you may go a little longer with that. There have literally been times that I've done the closing in just 1 minute. Thanks for being here. What's one thing you're going to take away? What's one thing that stands out for you right now that you're going to take away? What's the one thing you heard from someone else or heard in the lesson today that's going to stay with you? If you have a more relaxed time, then you can do some of the journaling. You can where you return to the lesson, or again, however you want to close the session. But again, this has to be somewhat flexible. These numbers, especially in terms of the time limits or time recommendations, are definitely flexible. So, all right, you've completed the training for how to facilitate session 2 of a Parent Wellness Circle. And now we're just going to provide a short summary whiteboard video that looks back on what we've learned, and then we'll turn to the next session and next tutorial on how to facilitate session 3.